Hello, my name is Séverine Martin. I'm the director of Columbia's undergraduate program in Paris, and it is my great pleasure to introduce this conversation between Professor Lorenzo Kihlgren Grandi and Christian Lequesne. Professor Kihlgren Grandi is a faculty member at Sciences Po, Polytechnique, and Columbia University in Paris. His latest work, City Diplomacy, published in 2020 by Palgrave Macmillan, will be discussed today with Professor Christian Lequesne, an eminent faculty member of Sciences Po. This conversation is part of a larger webinar series called Reimagining Cities. And so if you are interested in this topic, please continue to follow us after the webinar. Thank you. Without further ado, Lorenzo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martin. It is really a pleasure to be here with you. I would like to thank you, Columbia in Paris, for convening this book launch. It is really a pleasure to share with you my research and my background. And thank you to Professor Lequesne for being a discussant today. Well, I would like to share with you a little bit what was the background of this book, how the book was born, actually, how it became a reality. It is definitely inscribed in my personal background. In fact, I started in 2014 through a public selection at the municipality of Milan as a city diplomat myself. I was selected to enhance the international relations of the city in the framework of the big challenge for this city, which was the 2015 Universal Exposition. And well, of course, as city diplomat, I think we will try to put a spotlight on it today. It is definitely quite a complex topic. It was not clear to, and of course, to many people, including myself. I had to use a lot of creativity in order to define what this means. And I was really, I had a lot of chance of having the guidance of skilled professionals. The city of Milan is one of the oldest cities in terms of engagement in international relations in Italy. And I also had the chance of having as a boss the mayor, former mayor of Milan, Giuliano Pisapia, who had this vision of matching global values, universal values, with local interests in an international strategy, which is really one of the core elements of city diplomacy, as we will discuss later. I was, of course, able as a city diplomat to interact with a variety of cities across the world. I negotiated the cooperation agreement with the city of Dubai and the city of Algiers. And of course, I was able to add my personal academic perspective to it. After this very challenging, very passionating opportunity at the municipality of Milan, I got to research and dig in even further on the topic of the international action of cities. And I was able to identify the impact of city diplomacy, its limits, starting from the legal limitations to this action, the evolution of the field, as well as the way the geographies of such a practice are actually evolving and moving. I have to say that I was really quickly aware of the fact that this field is extremely misunderstood, both by scholars of international relations, as well as by most of the professionals that are in fact in charge of managing. I was really lucky to work in a municipality with skilled professionals, but it was not in fact, the case for most of the city, unfortunately, which explains why city diplomacy is still limited to a minority of cities, mainly big cities, even though it is not only beneficial for this kind of urban areas. After having dug into this field, I was lucky to get the chance to teach it at Sciences Po, as you have mentioned. I started at Sciences Po. I am also teaching at the Polytechnique, and starting from this summer also at Columbia in Paris. And I was I got aware of this big interest of students to discover this connection between the local dimension and the global dimension, which is not very evident. Most of these students, they have gone through 3 to 4 years of international relations studies, and they figure out all of a sudden that there is this connection between the global and the local. And I am very proud to say that some of them are actually today city diplomats themselves. Well, so taking together this professional experience and this teaching experience, I decided to condensate them into this book. And this book, of course, has acts as a sort of an introduction to this new field. So city diplomacy is explained in a very pedagogical approach, going towards both the scholar, the student, and the practitioner. And there is, of course, a framing of the field with a century-long history, of course, the highlighting of the evolution, which is in fact the point where most of cities are not fully aware of the newest instruments that are coming up to this field. And finally, the relationship between the international organizations, the states, the NGOs, and the cities. Going through that, I also expand the 7 core dimensions of city diplomacy, which are in fact development cooperation, peacekeeping, economy, innovation, environment, culture, and migration. And for all of these 7 fields, I take into consideration the scope, the challenges and opportunities, the available tool to cities, and I analyze a series of case studies. Some of them that are best practices, other are actually examples of failure, but it is important to understand the full scope and impact of this field. This broad analysis has the goal of highlighting a series of common traits. And I would say that the first one is the one that I noticed the first when I joined the municipality of Milan, which was this combination of universal values and local interests. And the second point is this approach of cities for a partnership approach, which is at the same time horizontal and vertical. So horizontal in the framework of a multilateral approach of cooperation between cities in different fields, and in a very pragmatic way meant to improve the quality of life of citizens and the capacity of cities to act. And then another sort of declination of this collaborative approach, which is the stakeholder and the multi-level approaches. So multi-stakeholder approach means engaging a variety of local actors ranging from the NGOs, museums, universities, private sector, tourism organizations, and so on. And the multi-level approach, which is the one which is currently undergoing the most visible evolution right now, is in fact new forms of cooperation in foreign policy, meaning that the state, the national level connects with the city level in order to advance a shared agenda, which is basically dealing with the topics, the transnational topics that have a strong urban impact. This sort of approaches, these two approaches, vertical and horizontal cooperation, are actually have been highlighted very recently during the pandemic. We have seen all that while nation states have long struggled, and they to an important extent still struggling creating this common answer that has been asked, that have been sort of requested by the United Nations, by the European Union, but still struggles to a big extent to come up. We have seen immediately, really in matters of days from the beginning of the pandemic, cities connecting with each other with a strong component of solidarity with new geographies. It was quite interesting to see that for cities from high-income countries like Italy or France getting help from cities in lower-income countries because they were so hardly hit by the pandemic. There were no need, for example, to have enough masks or medical equipment, and they received the donations from friend cities, from sister cities across the world. The sharing of best practices during the pandemic was so strong. There are more than 60 platforms online that collect and present the best practices to deal with the many different impacts of the pandemic. And finally, what is happening right now, it's the co-creation of recovery strategies. So they know there will be a lot of challenges, even when the health challenge will be solved. Of course, we all hope very soon. Challenges mainly of economic and social terms. And so this is why they are working to put this strategy together in a collaborative way. So all in all, the goal of the book is basically to spread the understanding and the practice of city diplomacy with the goal of making, on one side, the international relations world benefit from the contribution of cities to this, especially through this cooperative approach to international relations. And on the other side, having local communities benefit from the many and concrete advantages that derives from the capacity of the city to connect the local to the global.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Thank you, Sabine, for the kind invitation. And I'll try now to, make a series of comments on what Lorenzo just said, and also on the book. Lorenzo is a modest person, so he didn't present to you his book, but this is the book which has been recently published by Palgrave Macmillan, and you, of course, you can have it and buy it. By all means, right? So there's an invitation to buy Lorenzo's book, right? Well, let me just start saying why is it important, of course, to have a look on cities, international relations, or diplomacy. First of all, because we are in a world where, well, the tendency of the population is to live more and more in urban areas, right? Maybe we'll have a change with COVID. I don't know, but I don't have the impression that it is massive. But this is something we can see in qualitative surveys. There is this tendency now for a certain number of people to leave the cities and to go to the countryside. In France, for instance, you have a certain number of rural areas, 100 kilometers of Paris, where suddenly the price of the real estate increase because of a high demand from people leaving Paris. But of course, when you are thinking also historically about citizenship, right? Citizenship has been mostly exercised and expressed in the cities. And the cities, of course, cannot just ignore the globalization of the world. So, as many other actors, they have to think about international actions. They have to think about developing their diplomacy. And what is very interesting in Lorenzo's book, which is a sort of typology of the different reasons why cities develop diplomacy, is that we see clearly there's not only one reason. There are very different reasons, a variety of of reasons sometimes which have nothing to do, right? And what is interesting is why some cities put the focus more on environment in the diplomacy, why others more on trade, why other more on the question of citizenship and human rights, solidarity, etc., etc. But what we have to keep in mind is that there is not one model of city diplomacy. There are several models, and very different. So it's why it's very important to make also comparison of case studies, and probably not limiting ourselves to the Western world, trying also to put in the comparative framework non-Western cases. Well, there is one question also that I would like to discuss maybe a bit more with Lorenzo, is that the cities, they can develop, of course, all the actions they want on an informal way. But if they decide to make agreements, if they decide to formalize their relationship, then in most of the states of the world, they have to make compromise with the state, right? And it's exactly the same than the regions or the subnational regions. Well, you can have a paradiplomacy, developing public diplomacy, etc., partnerships. We have a lot of partnerships in France with German cities. It's historical with British cities, and I was glad to read in your book that the first real partnership was between a British city, an English city, and a city in northern France just after the First World War, 1920, right? Okay, that's okay. But when you want to develop more formalized relations, then it's still the states which has in many cases the competences, right? So what is interesting is to see how sometimes a city do use informal mechanism, paradiplomacy, also to bypass this limits imposed by the legal framework. What I find also interesting, and here I'm maybe making a reference to the European situation, as you know, we have a rise of populism, in Europe, and this is something the Americans also experience for a couple of years. And when you look at the political forces in the countries where you have populist forces or strong populist parties, it's interesting to see that the cities are in general more liberal than the rest of the country. And this is something which has consequences on international relations. If you take Poland, for instance, or if you take Hungary, two countries where you have conservative populist governments, well, the situation is very, very different in the cities. Budapest, Warsaw, but also Gdansk, well, they have liberal governments. And it's interesting because you can see some connections now done by those cities to bypass the governments. We had very interesting initiatives from the mayors of the city of Prague, Warsaw, Bratislava, and Budapest to promote a certain sense of solidarity vis-a-vis the migration question, when in general the governments of those countries inside the European Union were totally opposed to welcome refugees and especially from the Middle East after the big 2015 flows. So it has an impact on politics, right? The way those mayors, of course, make alliances, publicize also their action. But it would be interesting, I'm not an historian, but it'd be interesting to ask the question also, why are the cities in general more liberals? And was it always like this in the history, or is it something which is more recent? But through this example, we could see that diplomacy could also reach party politics, right? And has a certain connection. I'm just saying a word with COVID. COVID was also, as you said, an interesting demonstration of cities trying to connect themselves for very functional reasons. Opening, if we take Europe, opening hospitals, if there were free space for people having the illness, but also manifestation of solidarity, which were very interesting, and which said something about the fact that citizens of the cities, when they imagine what solidarity shall be, they have less difficulty to really figuring out this solidarity at a small scale level than on a big scale level, right? It's if you have partnerships, for instance, with 2 or 3 cities all over Europe as a French city, before you think to the problem of the effects of COVID in Europe, you think about the effects of COVID in the partner cities, right? And this is something you can really understand, visualize. It has a concrete meaning for the citizens. And I'm speaking tonight from a city which is 50 kilometers south of Paris, Fontainebleau, which is well known for its castle. This is where I'm partly living. I'm sharing my life between Paris and Fontainebleau. And when the COVID happened, it was first in France before Germany. It's not the case anymore. The Red Cross of Fontainebleau was happily surprised to get money from the Red Cross of Constance in Germany, which is the partner city, right? Because some funding were organized by the citizens of Constance, thinking about the difficult situation of the illness in France. Well, this is something we have to also take into consideration when we are talking about European integration as a political process. Of course, the interstate relation is something very important. What we are doing, for public policies at the interstate level is important. But this intercity links also create some forms of common citizenship, and this is something we, of course, we have to take into consideration and to study more. Yes, I do agree, Lorenzo, and I'm finishing my comments here that you use the word, it's a pedagogical book, and I very much agree. Because it's a book which is very clear with a lot of definitions, typologies. Well, it's really interesting for students. Maybe the next book you'll have to write about that, if I may address you a suggestion, is the relations between the cities and the state, right? In the making of concrete diplomacy. So, Lorenzo, that could be the topic of volume 2, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your remarks. All very, very interesting. And for this final suggestion, which is, of course, I keep it very well in my mind. Well, you have mentioned elements that really are at the basis of the functioning and the evolution of city diplomacy. You have mentioned this legal relationship that city diplomacy has with the nation state. This is something that, as you mentioned, limits city diplomacy, and this happens in all kind of countries. This is because, of course, the way how international relations have been defined, we still live in a system that is somehow heir of the Peace of Westphalia of 1648, where the states have been identified as the only real players of international relations. That was not the case before. You had cities before, like, for example, Venice, that was the true Mediterranean power.
Can I just say one word on that, Lorenzo? The first ambassadors, who were born in Europe, right, were in those cities. Italian independent cities, right? Venice sending an envoy, and a permanent envoy, to Florence, Florence to Napoli, etc., etc. So, end of the 15th century.
Absolutely, and those cities that you mentioned are very, very proud of it. And this is part of their image, the image that they are getting back in somehow of being actor internationally. They're very proud of it. And about the limitations, it is true that given the fact that since we still live in this framework, where the personality of international law belongs to the states, and basically if a city does something wrong, the responsibility is the responsibility of the nation state. This, of course, is easily understandable that states want to limit and make sure that what cities do are in fact in line with their goals, their agenda, and their own agreements. This has happened quite often, in fact, that nation states intervene in order to cancel agreements or declaration, like it happened quite recently between cities and other local governments of France that have, for example, established friendship agreements with cities in the Nagorno-Karabakh. And the nation state of France decided through the prefect to cancel those agreements because they were seen as an obstacle to the peace process. Even without going to a clash, a direct clash, we can very much seen everywhere in the world, this sort of de facto empowerment of cities that go a little bit beyond what are their limitations. This was very, very visual as well also during the Trump presidency with the environmental issue, where you had Trump that withdrew the United States as a federation from the Paris Agreement. But as soon just as he did that, a group of cities of different size, and not only from democratic with democratic leadership, they joined forces and they made sure to reach with their collective effort the quota of CO2 emissions that was actually attributed to the United States as a federation. And they were already working on the quantification of that, but luckily for the planet, I would say now there is no more need for that. But we have seen this periodically, and you mentioned the element of migration. This is very, very true. The Pact of Free Cities that you mentioned is another way of seeing the main challenges that all cities are facing, and one of that, the migration, is seen as a threat by many governments, national governments, as in another totally different way, as rather an opportunity and something that responds to a moral good. A morally sort of guided action by many cities. You have mentioned this element of sort of a friction between liberal cities and populist countries. I would like to make just a small comment. I think this definitely deserves more research to have a historical perspective on that. But I would like to share with the viewers, in fact, something they might not know, that the first mayor of London, the position of mayor of London, was established in the year 2000. London didn't have a mayor because the national government didn't want to have a sort of what was perceived to be a radical leader. So this was something that states were aware. So the first mayor was actually Ken Livingstone in the year 2000. Now we are at the third one of the history of London. Of course, there were other sort of levels of local governments older, but that was the first one for the whole city. Finally, you mentioned this element of solidarity between cities, this easiness of relations, and this capacity to be empathic in a way from one side or the other of the world through this local perspective. And I think this is also related to the specificities of the cities, how they are built right now, and also I would link that to the same limitations that we were discussing just a second ago. Well, cities do not own any means to impose their will. This is what also makes them so well seen, well perceived. They do not have to revenge national traumas such as invasions, wars, and so on. Basically, their approach is limited to the management of local affairs. And this is something which they have to do, on which they are judged, which depends the election of local leaders. And in a way, the fact that they are deprived of the tools of the states in terms of basically the military power makes them a very important addendum to international relations. Oh, sorry. I think there were a couple of questions.
Let's take the questions. Yes, of course.
I see that there is a Miss Sturner saying, I was wondering in your research if you found instances in which other actors shaped this city role, and what would you say cities can do to ensure ownership of the city role at the international level? Well, this is a very interesting and difficult question. There is a big debate about this right now at international level. And I have to say that the cities are not alone in establishing this new rethinking of international roles. The international organizations themselves are extremely open to discuss, guide, and even foster the international action of cities. And this is because the leadership of most international organizations really goes hand in hand with this cooperative approach we were discussing with Professor Lequesne. This is something that has led to the invitation of cities to many consultations open to civil society as well, in the framework of processes to leading to international agreements. But we have to be clear on that. Cities are never part of the decision-making process. Cities do not vote for agenda, international agreements, agendas, and so on, including, for example, the new urban agenda that was negotiated by states in 2016 in Quito. It is about how including the urban dimension into international relations and how to foster sustainable urbanism. But in fact, this text is certainly the result of an exchange with cities in the consultation part, but then it's negotiated only by states. So this is something that is opening to a redefinition of how those negotiations work. And this is definitely an ongoing process. There are many actors that are doing so, not only the international organization. For example, the city of Geneva has created a research institution, which is called the Geneva Cities Hub, where they are working, trying to connect the cities and the other international relations, in particular the United Nations that are in Geneva, in order to define what kind of practical ways are available to include the states in the cities in those processes. So this is an ongoing debate. One idea that is coming up that might be implemented in the near future is actually having the states integrate in their own national delegation mayors as representative of urban affairs. So this might be one of those. Cities, of course, they really want to have what they call the seat at the global table. And this is something that is recurring in the actors in city diplomacy. Many city networks like C40, UCLG, which is United Cities and Local Government, is a big city, a network of more than 240,000 representatives. C40 is actually the most visible actor of environmental city diplomacy. Those networks, they want the seat at the global table, but we have to define a framework for cities to act in. What do you think, Christian?
No, I would like to add a point on this question of the relations between city and migration, because this is the question asked by Julia. I think historically cities were very flexible for welcoming migrants, right? And of course, we had a lot of success to a certain extent about creating new social links, new social integration. Well, let's take New York City, of course, but also Marseille. If we take the example of a French city, or London is another good example. I think what is interesting in the contemporary debate about cities and migration is that the cities, because of migration, are obliged, are forced to think again about the question of social mixity, because the tendency in the last 30 years in many cities, well, it was different in the US, because in the US you had this suburb evolution, when in Europe it was more the centers of the cities, which were really colonized by the upper class, right, and gentrification, etc. Well, it's still the case. If you take Paris, if you take Rome, of course, it's very expensive to live in the center of the cities. But because of migration, because of the influx of new population, with of course fragile on the social because of the social background. Again, we have a certain obligation in the cities to think about well, being mixed areas or being mixed communities, right? We had a tendency to forget this thing for 20, 30 years, and this is a positive effect on of migration on the management of cities. Again, there is a debate about social mixity, uh, which has disappeared a bit from the agenda, right? I don't know what you think about that. That's my impression.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christian. I totally agree with you. And I have seen this process as being supported once again by international organizations. There are two of them mainly, but a lot of them are, of course, working on migration and social mixity. But two of them are particularly active in fostering this collaboration with cities, which are the Council of Europe, which has launched its program called Intercultural Cities, and UNESCO, which launched its network called ICAR, which is Inclusive and Sustainable Cities. And so those two programs, they have in common the fact that they identify the challenges posed by migration in cities, which is inequality, different access to security services, different access to education, health, and so on. And the fact that unfortunately those difficulties have been highlighted by the pandemic. Inequality of all kinds has been worsened during these last few months, unfortunately. And the message of those networks and the cities that are members of them is to use this approach, which is called the intercultural approach, which is something that goes beyond the assimilation approach of some countries and the multicultural approach of some others, in order to make diversity really a tool of for empowering not only the migrant communities, but in fact the whole community, something that is beneficial for everyone. And I think this can reconnect to the discussion we were saying about populism and sort of progressive approach. The idea of city diplomacy, and how it has had its evolution. That city diplomacy started with friendship and values. Reconciliation really led to the blossoming of twinning agreements after the Second World War, with West German cities connecting with French cities and with British cities. And this included a clear idea of getting together with the former enemy, forgetting the past, and building the future together. Also in a regional approach and pro-European approach, of course. This is something that has still remains, is very, very strong, the idea of solidarity between cities, but local leaders have figured out that it's not enough to just talk about values, because the dialectics of my country first can also be found in cities. In city councils, you find elected representatives say, why should you waste money in cooperating with developing countries? You have to fix the potholes or fix the lighting in the city. So, and how they respond to this question? The idea is to create an engagement of local actors and engaging the whole population in this international connection, so that not only it is morally good, but it's also making the community participate, taking experience, and even economically speaking, thriving, because you can build a well in Africa, and doing so by involving volunteers from local NGOs that gain a professional experience, by involving local companies that they can dig the hole, and do so in establishing a partnership with local community, local companies, and then the relationship will always seen as a long term. This is something which is also different between cities and NGOs. Cities has the capacity, since our institution, they are supposed to stay there for a long time. They are able to see the long run, and they say, okay, for the future generation, we will cooperate. And maybe certainly at the beginning, we are a little bit more a donor and a receiver. Of course, this is very true in many cases, but we are going to become more and more partners by identifying a series of goals that are shared and they are connected with the population.
Can I just say one thing about the difference between cities and NGOs? I think it's not only the capacity of the city to think the long run, it's also the legitimacy. And this is something we shall never forget. Most of the cities have elected bodies, right? They have been elected by the people, by the citizens, and this is creating a form of legitimacy, right? This is why I'm always reluctant to consider that there are two categories of actors in foreign policy or international relations. One, the states, and then the non-state actors, right? What does it mean, non-state actors? It's a sort of melting pot, and you cannot compare the legitimacy of a city or the legitimacy of a province in a country like Canada, for instance, with the legitimacy of an NGO. It's totally different. Of course, expertise can also create legitimacy, and NGOs, they also have expertise. But the cities, well, all the actors that we usually put in the category of actors doing paradiplomacy, they have forms of political legitimacy, which of course make them different diplomatic actors when they are acting in the field of international relations. I think we cannot compare them to firms, to NGOs, to associations, etc., etc. It's different.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And this is actually a source of headaches for cities, because not infrequently they are put in this case. And initially, the United Nations had really have put them in the NGOs group, which was met with a series of protests by cities, because they have highlighted what you were saying. So those are institutions, those are public bodies, especially with a legitimacy which is more and more based on election, because the whole world has been undergone a decentralization process. This is something that has, for example, reached more recently the continent of Africa, where historically the local leader had been selected by nation states, and now with Cameroon, for what concerns the Francophone Africa, whole the Francophone Africa just now elects the local leaders. So definitely this is a different approach, and it's related to these two elements that make cities important in international relations, this essence that make them relevant. It is the fact that they are the closest political institution to the citizens, which allow this exchange of ideas with the population, the capacity of being representative of those interests and those views. This is easier, of course, when you are so connected with the population. And second point, which is also one of the bases of the city diplomacy, is that cities are the #1 service provider across the world. So they had to provide a series of public services such as lighting, waste management, public transportation, and so on, either directly or indirectly through collaboration with public or private companies. But generally speaking, in global terms, they are in charge of that. And this is why they have this very practical approach of cooperating, because they have these challenges and they ultimately they really want to do this job better. I have seen that there is an interesting remark by Patrizia D'Alessio. She mentions the Ibn Battuta reporting cohabitation of 5 different populations in major Chinese cities in 1355, 1138. Well, this is very, very interesting to connect this to this element we were mentioning before of having cities as a melting pot since always, and be somehow able to put the different actors and together. And I also see that Janina also mentioned the foreign relations bill in Australia. This is interesting because we have seen that while generally speaking, cities and local governments are getting more and more active, not always nation states are happy of that. And in the case of Australia, this was what ignited the sort of reaction of the national state is the relationship with China. So there is a confrontation on a series of issues between the Australian government and the Chinese government. And so the cooperation expressed by some local governments in Australia has been seen as a sort of an obstacle to this political view. And so we have a series of additional controls that have been put in place by the Australian government. But in other cases, like I would like to mention the case of France, rather than putting sort of legal framework, the idea is to progress toward a common goal. And I would like to mention the fact that Africa is really an example of how the national government and the local government of France are actually cooperating. There is a lot of support by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France through a dedicated office, which is called the Delegation for the External Action of Local Collectivities, that works in providing both, I would say, training and information to cities, as well as also providing grants for cities that want to cooperate in Africa. And this, truth be said, is probably also related to the fact that the French government is aware that the national powers, the representative of the nation state of France might have in some countries a mixed feelings, especially in countries that had a heritage of colonization and might question the post-colonial relationship. While cities represent, with this pragmatic approach, with this cooperative approach we were mentioning, an opportunity for doing this sort of friendship building. And this friendship, of course, also opens up to the possibility of cooperating, including economically in the future.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because it's the proof that all the symbolism of the past is on the shoulders of the states, right? And the example you are mentioning with France, well, using the cities, because the cities, they do not have this well, high symbolic image of colonialism, etc. Well, even if we have to be cautious, because some of those cities were prosperous because of slavery, right? I'm thinking about Bordeaux or
Absolutely.
about Nantes, and now they have policies to think in a positive sense, resilience to this past. But it's exactly for the same reasons then the French government is also using the European Union for military operation in Africa, it's interesting because you have the two, you have the bottom and you have the up, right? Because if you go to Africa under the European flag, well, in terms of symbols, well, you could be less accused of, well, being, can I say that, directly inspired by the colonial legacy, right? So it's interesting because it's the states which capture most of the burden of the past, right? As you say, we see the other actors, could be the EU or it could be cities, more neutral to a certain extent vis-a-vis the responsibility of the past. It's an interesting question. I've never thought about that before, but it's your remark which inspire me now.
Thank you, Christian. And I would like to add, in fact, that this is something which happens mainly in democracies. And I mentioned this in the book. There is a big challenge in assessing the real impact, the real scope and tools of city diplomacy in countries that are run by autocratic regimes. So in that case, what France is doing in a democracy is to, of course, offer the possibility to the cities to benefit from this kind of grants, and this way align with the national foreign policy. But this is definitely something which is open to the free will of the local councils. But this is not the case for many cities, where city diplomacy is put in at use by national governments that have their own city diplomacy agenda. So there are countries that want to, for example, to use cities to improve the perception of a non-democratic regime or for commercial purposes. And in that way, it is very challenging for cities in democratic countries to decide should they cooperate with them or not. So when they ask me this question, my analysis, my answer is, of course, to get information. Cities need to know what they are working with, what kind of regimes they have, what are the agenda. And this is a weak spot of cities because they do not have the information system that nation states have. So this is where it is extremely important for democracies to work with career diplomats and reach out to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and ask what are the stakes, are there possibilities that this cooperation is used for political goals by a non-democratic regime. So this is definitely important. But once this connection with the national diplomacy is done, once the city has all the tools to understand, I think it is legitimate. The city want to cooperate even with those kind of cities under this regime, because when they act in the poor nature of city diplomacy that we are mentioning, so cooperative, open to the participation of cities, this really can have a beneficial effect to population that are living under this difficult political situation, and finally lead to an increased quality of life and hopefully to an opening towards a more democratic future.
Wonderful. It seems that we've covered so much ground in just 1 hour on this very fascinating topic. I don't know if there are any last remarks. Otherwise, voilà, it seems that voilà, Professor Lequesne, you sent an invitation to Lorenzo Kihlgren Grandi to publish volume 2.
Exactly.
On voilà, because it is voilà, a lengthy topic. Okay, so thank you very much. And voilà, keep following us with the Columbia Global Centers for future programming. Au revoir.
Au revoir, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.